All right, let's jump right in. What if I told you there's a 2,000-year-old puzzle hiding on the very first page of the Bible? A mystery that might just change how we see everything that follows. Our source material for this explainer claims that everything we've been taught about the beginning could be based on a huge misunderstanding. So, yeah, let's dive into this. So, right out of the gate, Genesis throws us a curveball. Chapter 1 tells a creation story, and then Chapter 2 seems to tell another one, and they don't really line up perfectly. For centuries, people have scratched their heads over this. Is it a mistake? Are they just two different camera angles? Or, as our source material suggests, is it something else entirely? Let's really look at the two different sets of marching orders. In Genesis 1, humanity gets this massive global mission: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. It's all about expansion, right? But then in Genesis 2, one guy gets a very specific local job: to work and keep a single garden. These aren't just slightly different takes on the same mission. One is a command to populate the entire planet, the other is a job to be a gardener in a very special, contained place. So that's the core of the puzzle for this explainer. How in the world do we make sense of these two seemingly contradictory stories at the very dawn of the biblical narrative? Let's unpack the common explanations first, and then explore the wild theory at the heart of our source material. For centuries, people have tried really hard to make these two stories fit together, to harmonize them, and a couple of big theories have risen to the top. We're going to take a look at the two most common ones, and then we'll see why our source material says they both miss the mark. All right, let's get into the mainstream interpretations. These are probably the explanations you heard in Sunday school. They both try to smooth over the cracks you just pointed out. But do they really hold up? Okay, so this table breaks down the two big theories. First up is the Orthodox view. It's simple. Genesis 1 is the big picture summary, and Genesis 2 is the zoom in, the close-up with all the details. Makes sense, right? Well, the source argues this view just ignores the totally different commands we just talked about, not to mention that weird plural language: let us make man. Who's us? Then you have the gap theory. This one's a bit more dramatic. It suggests that a whole other world, maybe with dinosaurs and angels, existed between verse 1 and verse 2 and was destroyed. Adam is part of a recreation. The problem? It creates a huge theological issue. If death existed before Adam, then it really messes with the core idea that sin and death enter the world through his actions. And this is where our source material just flips the table. It asks a pretty provocative question. What if both of those theories are wrong? And what if they're not just wrong, but they're actually distractions designed to keep us from seeing a third, much deeper, and honestly much more unsettling possibility? And that brings us to the absolute core idea of our source material. They call it the two Adams hypothesis. The idea isn't about one story told twice. It's about two completely different stories. So get this. The central claim is that Genesis 1 is describing the creation of the races, of mankind in general, to fill up the whole earth. And then Genesis 2 describes a totally separate second event, the special formation of a single man, Adam, who was made for a very different purpose. We're talking two creations, two humanities. Now just think about what that means. If this theory is right, the Garden of Eden wasn't the beginning of the world at all. It was an intervention, a kind of holy zone, a heavenly embassy, plopped down on a planet that was already full of people from that first creation event. Adam wasn't the first man ever. He was the first of a new kind of man. Okay, that is a huge claim. So where's the evidence? The source argues that the clues have been hiding in plain sight this whole time, right in the original Hebrew words used in the text. Let's dig into the language. The first key word is bara. In Genesis 1, when God creates mankind, this is the verb that's used. And our source stresses that this word specifically means to create something brand new out of absolutely nothing. It's a purely divine act of creation from scratch. But then in Genesis 2, the language completely changes. When Adam is made, the verb used is yatsar. This doesn't mean creating out of nothing. It means to form, to mold, to shape something from material that's already there, like a potter working with clay. The source insists this isn't just poetic license. It's a technical distinction between two totally different kinds of creative acts. And here it is. This is what the source presents as the linguistic smoking gun. In Genesis 1, the Hebrew word for mankind is Adam. Simple enough. But in Genesis 2, the text adds a little two-letter prefix, ha. It says God formed ha-Adam. Ha is the Hebrew equivalent of the word the. So it's not just man or mankind being formed, it's the Adam. a specific, singular individual. Two different Adams, distinguished right there in the text. Now here's where it gets really interesting. If you accept this theory, the source says a bunch of those classic Bible puzzles suddenly just click into place. Remember after Cain kills Abel, he's terrified someone will kill him? Who? Well, the people from Genesis 1. And where did he find a wife? From that same pre-existing population. And that bizarre story in Genesis 6 about the sons of God and the daughters of men? The source says that's the moment the two humanities collided. So, you see, this changes everything. The Bible is no longer a simple family tree. According to our source material, it becomes the story of a secret war between two entirely different lineages, one that's earthly and one that's spiritual. And that leads to this really dramatic rereading of the entire book. The Bible, in this light, becomes a secret history of a conflict that started before the Garden of Eden, and, they argue, is still going on today. It's a struggle between the line of Adam and the line of the Adam. Genesis 6 is the flashpoint in this conflict. The source identifies the sons of God as the descendants of the Adam, the spiritual line from the garden. And the daughters of men are the descendants of the general Adam from that first global creation. When they mix, it's seen as a corruption of the divine plan, and it's what leads directly to the judgment of the Great Flood. This timeline shows how the source traces this theme of separation all the way through the scriptures. It starts with the two humanities being created. It flares up in Genesis 6 with the mixing of the bloodlines. And this theme of separation keeps popping up. In the Old Testament, Israel is constantly warned not to intermarry with other nations. Even in the New Testament, there are warnings about not being unequally yoked. It's like this hidden engine driving the whole biblical story forward. So, why does any of this ancient stuff matter today? Well, the source points to a stark warning from Jesus himself in the book of Matthew. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. The argument is that the defining sin of Noah's day, that forbidden mixing of the divine and the earthly, is happening all over again. But this time, the tools are different. It's not about marriage. It's about technology. Things like transhumanism, genetic editing, and AI, all seen as humanity's attempt to upgrade itself, to create its own new and improved lineage. So this all builds to what the source presents as a really urgent, personal decision. It frames two possible paths for our future. There's the earthly lineage from Genesis 1, which is trying to achieve its own kind of salvation and immortality through its own power and technology. And then there's the spiritual lineage from Genesis 2, which finds its purpose in its salvation through the line of the Adam, which is ultimately perfected in Christ. So we started with a little contradiction on page 1, and we've ended up with a cosmic battle for the future of our species. The source material isn't just offering a new theory about the past, it's presenting a radical way to understand our present. It claims there's a secret war between two humanities, leaving us with one final, very provocative question. Which of these two bloodlines, the earthly or the spiritual, will ultimately define our destiny?